So thank you very much for coming. I've had the pleasure of knowing Stewart. We figured out for about 11 and a half years. We've worked together and been friends for that time. And he's a really special entrepreneur who builds special products and special companies. And I'm really happy to share him with you all. I think even those who know Yahoo may not know Slack. So I think a good place to start might be sort of rolling back through time. And I think the story of how Slack came to be from the glitch era is pretty interesting. So maybe you could tell, the 5-minute version of how Slack emerged.
That's a big investment. We got 22 minutes. I'm going to do the 3.5-minute version.
Okay, go.
So, the spring of 2009, what was that? Almost 7 years ago. Me and 3 other people, all of whom worked on the original Flickr team, decided to try what we were doing when we made Flickr, which was build a web-based, massively multiplayer game. And it didn't work again, but it took us 3.5 years, 45 people working on it, to get to the point where we discovered that it didn't work again. And in the meantime, we had developed this system for internal communication, which we really liked. And at the time that we shut down the game, when we were deciding what we wanted to do, we realized we would never work without a system like this again. And then that became Slack. So there's actually the 45-second version.
That was the 45-second version. You should use the extra time to make a note to yourself to go to YouTube and look up glitch trailer and take a look at the game. Because one thing that you pass over in the 45-second version is really how much energy was expended in building this game. It wasn't a lark. I mean, this thing was magnificent and really involved lots of
hundreds of hours of music composition and arrangement and millions of frames of animation and crazy art. And it was in 1992. Oh my God. 24 years ago, I arrived at university and got an account on the school's Unix machine and got exposed to the internet. So there was technically a World Wide Web at that point, but no one had heard of it. It was really small. But there was Usenet, which was like news groups, kind of like discussion boards. There was a Unix program called Talk, which you could use to communicate with people remotely. So kind of like instant messaging, except that you could see each character as it was sent over. So when you made a typo, you'd have to be willing to let the other person see you backspace. There was email, and it was just kind of mind-blowing for me that we had telephones for a long time, and we had satellite telephones. So technically, you could bounce a signal off a satellite and hit the surface of the Earth somewhere else, and anyone on the surface of the planet could reach anyone else at the surface of the planet, literally at the speed of light. But the internet was a little bit different because it allowed for not, I'm trying to reach the specific person, so I dialed the specific number, but I am a model train enthusiast, and I would like to meet other model train enthusiasts. I'm a breast cancer survivor, and I would like to meet other breast cancer survivors. Or in the case of me, I liked the band Fish, and I would like to, and this is 92. So. And I grew up in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, so really far from New England, far from the epicenter of that stuff. And I carried that with me for so long because the kinds of interactions you could have when you were loosed from the bounds of geography and age and gender and height and linguistic ability were just, it was a profound experience that unpacked over the last 20 years. And the desire to make a game wasn't about video games per se, but about creating a space for social interaction where play was the environment, in the same way that, I don't play golf, but I can imagine golf is a great pretext to go for a 3 or 4 hour walk with friends in the hills or the woods. And I like playing board games with people, and there's something about that that's a little bit different than just inviting people over to hang out.
So I want to take a moment and talk about Slack today, because you sort of said this was the result of collaborating with people around the world to create this game, and you realized and pivoted, they call it a pivot in the industry, and realized that that was the product, not the game. But Slack is something very special. A tagline I've heard you use is making work less worky. What is Slack about? What does it do for organizations and people trying to create something together, and how does it change the way that people work together?
Okay, so I'm going to preface this with the kind of the caveat that if you're looking back on it, it'll sound like we were geniuses and we had this all planned out in advance, but we stumbled into almost all of the good part of this. Slack is a messaging app for teams, and unlike many messaging apps, you don't necessarily address a message to an individual or a group of individuals. You address a message to what we call a channel, and this is based on IRC. If any of you used IRC back in the 80s or 90s, same thing. And the difference is that a channel exists whether you're a member or not. And if you join later, you'll have the whole history. If you leave, your contributions remain there for others. And what ends up happening as a result of that is this massive increase in lateral transparency. So usually when people use the word transparency in the context of work, it means that the bosses are forthcoming about what's really going on with the business, or in some cases, less frequently, that the workers are good at reporting up to the bosses or something like that. But here we mean people can see what's happening across the organization. They can see what their peers in other groups, whether those are other functional groups, so one person in sales and one person in engineering, or just at a large company, people on other teams working on other projects. And it's a pretty profound shift. And there's a lot of resistance when people first start using it, because I guess there's two instincts that are contrary to this. The first one being, I don't want people to know that I don't know the answer to this question, so I would prefer to ask the question in private. And yet there's a huge amount of value if you ask the question in public and get the answer in public, because then everyone can see the answer. And also it's helpful to know when people have a question. And the other one is there's a negative tendency in some environments towards information hoarding as a means of control. So if you control the flow of information, then you have this power, and that's rarely a healthy dynamic. So it's not like we intended, we designed the product in order to combat those two things, but it's a byproduct of the way that it's set up. And the other one is that the effort that people put into communication, and every person at work spends a lot of their time in communication, but for a knowledge worker, it's kind of a baseline at minimum of 30 or 40% of their time. And for a manager, it's 80 or 90%. At an executive level, it's more or less 100% of your time is spent on communication. So I mean, attending meetings, reading email, writing email, the technical specification, the PowerPoint presentation, just all of that stuff. Thinking about how you're going to express something, parsing out someone else's instructions. So in the context of something like Slack, the effort that people put into communication is something that accrues and accretes over time and becomes a resource that is shared.
So just in case people haven't heard, Slack has been called the fastest growing SaaS startup of all time. It reached a multi-billion-dollar valuation. I think you just celebrated your 2-year anniversary. And the passion, I think this is really what strikes me, is this is enterprise software. This is software that people use at work, but the passion that your users have for the product, the love they have for the product, the communication they have with each other and with you about the product is unlike anything I've seen in the consumer or enterprise space. Why do you think that is? What is it about the product that engenders such affection and love for something that is just about working?
So the short answer is I have no idea. The long answer is there's many, many factors. So I know what some of them are. One of them is the aesthetic of it. And when Bradley's team led the acquisition of Flickr, so Bradley brought me into Yahoo. And when I got there, I'd never worked at a big company before. I'd done lots of consulting work for big companies, and I couldn't believe how bad the software was that you used inside of the company, and later found out that this is true at every big company. The stuff that you use to file expense reports or get your pay stub or request a vacation or something like that. And we're not like that. And because one thing that's really interesting about game design, let me back up. How many of you play board games once in a while or have played a board game in your life? So everyone has had this experience of either you are the explainer or you are the explainee when someone's sitting down to play a board game. And so they're trying to go through all the rules and figure out the right order to tell you, I know, but you can't do that, but on your turn you have 3 actions and you can only trade cards at the beginning, that kind of stuff. So games that you play on computers are no different. And usually the art of game design is the slow unpacking of the possible moves that you can make in this game. So, if you imagine just going back to something that most people know, like Mario Brothers or something like that, you can move back and forth. And you can also jump, and you can combine the movement with the jump. And then in some games, you can move and jump and shoot. And you kind of go through these levels, and you get more and more facility, and you simultaneously learn what's possible. And you also learn the purpose of these actions, what the goal of the game is. And what the game designers call new user experience is really critical. So we spend a lot of time in the context of a work application trying to show people what the moves are in the software and why you would want to make those moves and what the kind of goals are. So that's another reason. I think the biggest reason is the impact that it has on these organizations. And we have a Twitter account called Slack Love Tweets, all one word. It just retweets nice things that people say, and there's 10,000 of them or something like that. And as you said, it's really unusual for people to talk about the software that they use at work, period, unless they're professional software users, like architects or something like that, and they're geeking out over their kind of gearhead stuff. But here, people say, I can't imagine what it was like to work without this, or how did we ever survive, or I love it. We've had marriage proposals. We've had hundreds of tweets where people say, I love you. First of all, it's fantastic. It's really gratifying to work on it because of that. From a pure business perspective, obviously, it's great too, because to the extent that you can have people telling each other that this software is great, the software that we use at work, you come in from a very different angle than if you saw an advertisement or if you were forced to work it. If someone you trust or someone you respect says, I like this, then you just have a very different orientation towards it.
So moving from Slack to you for a little bit, we heard a little bit about in the introduction, and you're not the typical Silicon Valley archetype of the startup CEO. When I think of that, my mental image is white, middle-aged, male, handsome, tall.
Tall.
And you're not tall.
Yeah.
So actually, we're going to talk about diversity a little bit later. But what is true is that your background as a philosopher is pretty unusual for the role you hold in the company, and may provide something of a different perspective on the product you're building, the company you're building, et cetera. So I just wonder if you have any sense of how your own background and interest, has that been a part of why your company is so unique in the industry?
I think so. There's 4 co-founders, as I mentioned, and one of the other ones, Eric Costello, one of the best engineers I've ever met, but has a degree in English literature. So there's definitely a humanist approach to the design of software. We were actually just talking with, his name escapes me, but the gentleman from Google who's Tristan,
yeah.
studying attention.
Yeah.
And
you're quoting Spinoza and
No. The point was more about the do not disturb feature and kind of the double reverse psychology of designing software for software that's intended to have a high degree of empathy, to understand how people work and to be less frustrating or to be less intrusive or less demanding of attention. So I think it definitely helps. We have a great depth of technical talent, so we can understand the kinds of things that need to be built and how to build them. But in the question of what are we building and why are we building it, we can, stay longer around the kitchen table at 3 a.m. talking about it.
Cool. So you mentioned empathy, and I've read that empathy is one of the characteristics you actually hire for. So I'd like you to talk about empathy a little bit, and how do you detect empathy in the course of an hour-long interview with an individual, and what does that sort of bring to the problem of creating software products for the enterprise?
So really early on, one of our engineering managers came up with this list of traits that it would be good for us to hire for, and the 3 of them that on his list were empathy, curiosity, and diligence. And I thought those were great because it's actually, despite the fact that it's only 3 items, it's pretty comprehensive. And the importance of the empathy one is it's very difficult to design something for someone for whom you have no empathy. Charles Eames has a great quote that the role of the designer is that of a good host. And if you think about when you are hosting someone, I mean literally someone staying at your house, and you perhaps take the set of towels that they are intended to use and put them on the bed that they're going to sleep on, so that it's unambiguous which towels they are supposed to use. And little touches like that. If you just don't care about other people or have no regard for their situation or how they're going to feel about things, it's pretty hard to come up with those on your own. It's also obviously a much more pleasant working environment and much more effective teams when you have a high degree of empathy for your colleagues. What was the question?
Well, the question is, has that influenced the product? And I think the answer you just said is absolutely, that empathy is not only to work with people who aren't assholes, which is, you know, a side benefit of this. It also helps you create great products for millions of people who use them. But how do you screen for that? How do you, in the course of an hour, sort of figure out whether this person is your kind of people?
So I have a way that I like to do it, and we've had a lot of conversations about this internally, and not everyone on the team agrees with this. But one of the questions I like to ask people is, well, first of all, my favorite question to ask an interviewee is, tell me your story. Just want to know how people got to where they are in life. And this is a little bit difficult to put into a direct question, but to ask someone about the degree or the role which luck played in their successes. I think, and again, there's some controversy about this on the team, but I think that there's a very high degree of correlation between people who are willing to put some of their success in the serendipity bucket versus the I worked hard and earned it bucket. Now, that's not going to be a guaranteed test, but it's one thing that I think helps. I guess if you feel like some of your success, at least, is attributable to luck, and by the way, I feel like 98% of my success is attributable to luck or being in the right place at the right time, then it's much harder to find lack of success in someone else a moral failure or something like that. And I mean, I have known so many people in my life who are, you know, intelligent, wonderful, humane, loving, generous people who are disasters professionally. I mean, just like complete disasters. And so it's difficult for me to think that there was something wrong with them, either, you know, like a character defect or something like that. So this is kind of a long answer, but in that area is what I'd like.
Yeah, it's a great answer. And I want to sort of segue into some of the thinking around diversity within the company, where you have done some great work there. For instance, when you just won a Crunchy, was it for fastest growing startup or best startup of the year?
Fastest rising startup.
Fastest rising startup. You sent 4 black engineers to go pick that up, and black women engineers, I think. And in a company as small as Slack, are you 300, 400, 500 people now?
Yes.
Yeah.
380 right now.
I think it's fantastic that you're focusing on this issue early in the life of the company. That's a company that's obviously going to grow into many thousands of people. But what is your thought around the work you're doing in diversity, and what is your approach, and why have you been so successful in actually creating a culture where people feel welcomed and included, and that is celebrated?
So I think there's part of it is increasing returns. So one of the women who went up on stage to collect the award is pretty outspoken on issues of diversity in the technology industry, is named Erica Baker. And when she came to interview at Slack, on the way, you know, like going to the conference room where she was meeting people or whatever, wherever she was walking around the office, she saw 2 other black women engineers who already worked at the company, and so she felt like maybe this is a place I could work. So when I say increasing returns, I mean some early hires make a big difference, and there's kind of a compounding or snowball effect.
Actually, it's interesting. I just noticed, I said you sent, sort of the royal you, meaning Slack sent 4 women to accept it. How did that happen? Was this something that was sort of...
Well, I wasn't going to be in town when the event happened.
So you'd have just gone and grabbed that?
There's an element of that that's difficult to answer. But I was also up for an award as well, the Founder of the Year, and I was talking to that group of women who were in the cafeteria, and someone jokingly said, since you're not going to be here, we should pick up your award. And then afterwards I thought, oh, actually that's kind of weird if they picked up an award that was intended for me, like in a sense, kind of a strange message. But if we win the fastest rising startup, you should collect it. So,
But you didn't win the other one?
I did.
I knew that.
Yes. But I made one of my co-founders collect it for me. And now there's all these pictures of Cal Henderson that say Stewart Butterfield on them.
Great.
Fooled Google image search again. But on the, so diversity can be a touchy
We know what you look
subject.
like.
I have one opinion which is a little bit controversial, at least, and that's that I think it's a moral obligation that people try to hire. So there's an argument on one side that says you get better business results, and therefore it's irresponsible from a business perspective to not hire a diverse team. And that may or may not be true. So I'm not saying it's not true. I just have no idea, and there's a small number of studies, and most of them are public companies that are very large, and yet also Google was pretty successful and wasn't started, didn't have a very diverse founding team. So it's also one of those things that I feel like you should avoid fats, you should avoid carbs, you should avoid fats, carbs, whatever, and back and forth, or this thing is great for you, also it gives you cancer, and we now, this drug is very good, but it also causes cancer, something like that. So who knows? And if we found out later that there was another study that said diverse teams actually underperform, would we then say, okay, well, we're not going to hire diverse teams anymore? There is undeniably, so you said white, male, a concentration of those kinds of people, and people tend to hire people like them. So the natural tendency is to say, well, I like myself. I find that I have many good attributes and qualities, and therefore this person who reminds me of myself probably also has many good attributes and qualities, and so we should hire them as well. And especially in an environment where so much wealth is being created in such a short amount of time, and so much innovation is happening. Let me back up a second. For a while, we were at Yahoo. I'm just not going to do that joke anymore.
Yeah.
In the Mission College campus, and there's like one floor that we were on, and just in the group of people that worked around us. So now you're a vice president at Google. There was Rob, COO at Groupon. Andrew went to go be a partner at Excel, and they invested in me. Jeff Weiner went on to be CEO of LinkedIn. Chad Dickerson, CEO of that. And so there's this, and it didn't matter that it wasn't anything special at Yahoo in 2005, 2006. It was like if you worked at eBay, or if you worked at PayPal, if you worked at Google, if you worked at Genentech, if you worked wherever, there was these incredibly powerful self-reinforcing network effects. And if you don't make a deliberate effort to include people in that, it's not going to spontaneously happen. And I guess the other thing I would say is there's an argument, and I don't think this is very controversial, or maybe it is. Some people say that, we're not going to hire black candidates, we're not going to hire women candidates because that would be lowering the bar. And that's obviously bullshit, because for two reasons. Thank you. Yeah. More praise for a white guy, that's perfect. But it's obviously bullshit for two reasons. So the first is, if you are a black man or a black woman in this industry, then you have to work 5 times as hard to get where you are. I mean, it's unambiguous, it's obvious. And same thing if you're a woman. And to get to the same level, to evaluate people based on their resume or their accomplishments, you have to take that into account. And the other thing is, if you're not hiring from some groups of the population, then you're obviously missing out on some people. Because no matter what you think about anything, the best computer programmer in the world, or I don't know, the top 0.01% of all programmers don't necessarily work at Google, right? I mean, they could be in Turkmenistan, or they could be in Nairobi, or they could be anywhere in the world, and they could be undiscovered and go to their grave never having had that opportunity. So making a deliberate effort, I think, raises the bar, and it makes it so you're going to find more people. If you're looking in more places, you're going to find more people, and you're going to spread that net wider, and you'll find the best people for the role.
Great answer. Could I get a time check from someone? Nope. 3:45. Okay, I'm just about out of time. One final question before I let you go. this, we talk a lot in Silicon Valley about unicorns, these startups who've reached $1 billion valuation. I think this may be the first audience you've spoken to where people really truly believe in unicorns. And I'm not talking about, no. My question is around mindfulness. You sort of at 12 years old renounced Dharma as your name. You sort of took a claim, and you're a very successful capitalist and entrepreneur and have built this company. But I see many hippie things leaking out into, into some of the philosophy here. And I just wondered, what was your take on this mindfulness movement and sort of your relationship to the work that you're doing in the company as it relates to some of the things we're thinking about here?
I think it's super.
Thank you, Stewart.
Yeah. One thing so I was in a meeting that started at noon today. I was like, oh God, I'm so angry. Like I'm hating this presentation. Nothing to do with the presentation. I was hungry. I didn't have enough coffee in the morning. So I'm very conscious of myself as a biological entity, like just as an animal. Like I happen to be this species. So I'm very grateful.
Yeah.
And we're self-conscious and have language and stuff like that. But we're so human. I'm so human. I'm such a dick sometimes, and it's like so passive aggressive and just by the way, I'm not alone. I'm sure y'all have an element of that in your own lives, and we don't acknowledge that. I think this is actually one thing, and maybe another reason that I think Slack has been successful, because we try to encourage people or try to invite people to bring their whole selves to work. And we've had a lot of people who identify as being very introverted, saying Slack is finally I have a tool, that I can participate in this, where I previously found it very difficult. Because that's not the norm, right? Like you're supposed to bring just a tiny slice of yourself and present this. You can say facade. I'm not sure if it's even unintentional. It's because it can be truly yourself, but it's just such a narrow, tiny, like dehumanizing percentage of who you are. There's a big red letters that say, "Please wrap up." So, in conclusion,
well, I'll do the wrap, Stewart.
Okay, thank you.
It's really refreshing to have a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company who comes up here, and when I ask, why is this successful, you say, I have no fucking idea. And when, prompted, you say, I'm such an asshole. And, it's very refreshing. And we... Thank you for bringing your whole self to everything you do for Slack in the world, and thank you for bringing your whole self here with us today.
Thanks, Bradley.